Hi, friends. Welcome to Reflections of the Spirit. This is our companion to our monthly spirit talks here at Cultivate Consciousness Wellness. And this is one of those opportunities we have to slow the conversation down a little bit. As you know by now, Spirit Talks gives us a chance to gather together, explore wisdom from different religions, spiritual traditions, and ways of understanding our place in this world. Here in Reflections of the Spirit, we get to linger. We get to take one of those ideas off the page, sit with it for a while, turn it around, look at it from different directions, and most importantly, ask what it might mean in our actual lives. This is not about convincing anyone about what to believe, and it certainly isn't about suggesting that all spiritual traditions are the same, because as you know, they are not. They have different histories, different practices, different understandings of the divine, and sometimes very different answers to life's biggest questions. But there's tremendous value in sitting together at the foot of that great spiritual hill and looking at the many paths people have taken as they searched for meaning, connection, purpose, and the divine. Sometimes another person's path helps us notice something we hadn't noticed from our own path. And that's what we're doing here. So, wherever you happen to be on your journey, religious, spiritual, questioning, curious, certain, uncertain, or somewhere in between, there is room for you in this conversation. So, let's reflect. We've had quite the journey this month talking about radiating your inner light and what that looks like. Over the past several weeks, we've looked at the idea through some very different spiritual lenses. We began with Christian mysticism, looking beyond simply believing certain things about God and toward the possibility of experiencing the divine within our own lives. Then we stepped outside and explored Wicca, contemporary pagan traditions, and Gaia-centered spirituality, where our relationship with the natural world gave us another way to think about connection, cycles, belonging, and the sacredness that surrounds us. Last week, we entered the world of Sufism, the mystical tradition within Islam, and explored the beautiful image of the heart as a mirror, something capable of reflecting divine light, but which sometimes needs a little polishing. Very different traditions, very different histories. And I don't want to end this journey by pretending that those differences don't matter, because they do. But think, I also don't think that we have to choose between honoring our differences and recognizing the places where we can understand one another. We can do both. And maybe that's part of what this entire journey has really been about. If you've spent much time with me, you've probably heard me talk about the idea of many paths up the same hill. It's an image that has become important to the way I approach spirituality. Imagine we're all standing around the base of a great mountain. We're all standing around one large peak of the Rocky Mountain. And the goal is for us all to reach the top. One person begins climbing from the east and takes one path. Someone else starts from the west and takes another path. Another begins on the north side. And then someone begins on the south side. And maybe someone begins from above in a plane or a helicopter and comes down onto the top that way. Someone takes a path that has been traveled by generations before them. Another person discovers a little trail through the trees. Somebody else might stop halfway up and say, you know what? I think I'm just going to sit here for a while. their experiences are not going to be identical. One person may walk through a forest, another may cross rocks, someone may find water, someone else might encounter snow, someone might jump out of a plane for the first time. And if all they can see is their own path, it would be very easy for each person to believe this is what the mountain looks like. And from where they're standing, they're right. That is what the mountain looks like from their path. But it isn't the only view of the mountain. That's one of the reasons I find value in studying different religious and spiritual traditions. Not because I think we should take every tradition, throw it into a blender, and pretend it all says the exact same thing. It doesn't. And not because I think we need to abandon the path that feels authentic to us. We don't. It's because sometimes learning how somebody else experiences the mountain helps us understand our own experiences a little differently. So let's look at these traditions one last time. When we explored Christian mysticism, we spent time with a Christianity that isn't only about doctrine, rules, or what someone says they believe. Mysticism asks us to move toward experience, toward relationship, toward transformation, toward encountering God rather than simply accumulating information about God. And for me, that connects very deeply with the way Jesus lived and taught. Love your neighbor. Care for people who have been pushed to the margins. Forgive. Serve. Look at the condition of your own heart. Let what you believe become visible through how you live. And whether Christianity is your path or not, there's a question there worth carrying. Does what I believe actually change the way I show up in the world? Because we can talk about love all day long, but eventually, love has to become a verb. If my spirituality makes me feel enlightened but doesn't make me more compassionate, I think that's worth examining. If it makes me feel closer to God but farther away from humanity, that's worth examining too. Maybe one way our inner light radiates outward is through the simplest things. How we treat people, how we listen, how we respond when someone makes a mistake, how we treat somebody who cannot do anything for us, how willing we are to love beyond the boundaries we've created. That's not always dramatic spiritual work, but it may be some of the most important. So let's take a look at what nature showed us. When we move into Wicca, contemporary pagan traditions, and Gaia-centered spirituality, suddenly our attention shifted. Instead of looking inward or upward, we looked around at the earth, at the cycles, at the seasons, at the creatures, at the relationships between ourselves and the natural world. And one of the ideas that stayed with me from that reflection was incredibly simple. We are not separate from nature. We're a part of it. Sometimes modern lives make that remarkably easy to forget. We wake up inside, we get into a vehicle, we drive somewhere else that's inside. We look at screens, we work under artificial lights, we buy food wrapped in plastic without ever seeing the soil that it came from. And we begin moving through the world as though nature is something we visit. We visit a park or a lake, a hiking trail, a vacation. But we're breathing air, we're drinking water, Our bodies respond to sunlight and to darkness. We move through the seasons. We need rest. We grow. We change. We age. We experience cycles. We are nature too. And perhaps radiating our inner light sometimes requires remembering that we belong to something larger than our individual selves. Then last week, we explored Sufism, and we sat with the image of the mirror of the heart. I love this metaphor because it turns our usual idea of self-improvement around. We so often approach personal and spiritual growth by asking, what do I need to become? What do I need to add or to achieve? How do I become more spiritual? How do I become enlightened? How do I become worthy? But the mirror gives us another possibility, doesn't it? What if the light is already there? What if sometimes the work is not adding more light, but gently clearing away what keeps us from reflecting it? Maybe that's fear or resentment, comparison, shame, old stories, beliefs that aren't even your own, the need to be right, the need for everyone else to approve of us, the belief that somebody else's light somehow threatens our own. And I especially love the Sufi concept of remembrance, because remembrance implies that perhaps some of what we're searching for isn't entirely new. Maybe there are things our souls already know that life has simply made difficult to hear or to see or to experience. And perhaps part of spiritual practice is learning how to remember. So, what happens when we put them beside one another? This is where it gets interesting and kind of fun, because I don't want to merge these traditions. I want to let them sit next to each other. Christian mysticism asks us to consider the divine experience within us and expressed through love. Nature-centered traditions remind us that we exist in relationship with the earth, its cycles, and something larger than our own individual selves. Sufism gives us the image of polishing the heart so divine light can be reflected more clearly. Different paths, but look at the questions that they leave us with. What lives within me? What am I connected to? What is obscuring my ability to love? How does my inner life become visible through the way I live? Those are questions almost anyone can sit with. You don't have to become a Christian mystic. You don't have to become Wiccan or pagan. You don't have to adopt Gaia spirituality. You don't have to become a Sufi. You don't have to become anything. You can simply listen, learn, and reflect, and decide whether something you've encountered helps you understand your own journey a little more clearly. Maybe inner light isn't exactly what we thought. When we began talking about radiating your inner light, it would have been very easy to turn this into another version of be positive, think happy thoughts, raise your vibration, smile, shine, be the light. And there isn't anything wrong with those things. Those things are beautiful. But after spending a month with this idea, I think inner light is much more complicated and much more beautiful than positivity alone. Sometimes your light looks joyful. Sometimes it's courageous. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like compassion. Sometimes it looks like saying no and setting a boundary. Sometimes it looks like admitting you were wrong. Sometimes it looks like telling somebody, I love you. Sometimes it looks like walking away from something that no longer allows you to be who you are becoming. Sometimes it looks like sitting beside somebody who is hurting without trying to fix them or fix it. Sometimes it looks like standing beneath a tree and remembering that you belong here. Sometimes it looks like looking into the mirror and finally seeing yourself with a little more compassion. Hold that for a minute. Seeing yourself with a little bit more compassion, giving yourself some grace. Light doesn't always look bright. Sometimes light simply allows us to see. And perhaps that's what makes this journey so important. You don't have to shine all the time. Again, if we're talking about radiating our inner light, you are not required to shine every second of every day. It's okay to save your battery sometimes. There are days when we're tired. There are days when we're grieving. There are days when we are angry. There are days when the best we can do is make it through the day. And I don't think that means we've somehow failed spirituality. Nature doesn't bloom 12 months out of the year. The sun sets, the moon moves through darkness, trees lose their leaves, fields lie dormant. Why would we believe human beings should exist in a permanent state of radiance? Maybe part of honoring our light is honoring the times when it needs tending to. The candle doesn't become less valuable because somebody shields the flame from the wind. Sometimes protecting your light is part of radiating it. Sometimes resting is part of the journey. Sometimes withdrawing for a while allows us to return more authentically. There is a difference between extinguishing your light and taking care of it. And here's another lesson that all of these traditions can help us remember. Your light does not have to look like my light. Your light does not have to look like somebody else's. It is authentically yours. Maybe you're the person who walks into the room and fills it with laughter. I love that. Thank you. Maybe you're the person who notices the one individual sitting quietly in the corner and making sure they aren't alone. I love that too. Thank you. Maybe you're the teacher. Maybe you're the creator. Maybe you're the nurturer. Maybe you're the organizer. I love all of that. Thank you. Maybe you're the person that challenges people, and that is wonderful too. Thank you. Maybe you listen. Maybe you're the person who asks the question nobody else thought to ask. That is beautiful. Thank you. Maybe your light is loud. Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it's incredibly visible. Maybe most people will never know how many lives you've touched. That is all beautiful. Thank you. None of those expressions is inherently more spiritual than another. That's why comparison can become such a powerful layer of dust on that mirror. If I'm constantly looking at somebody else's light, I may never notice my own. And that brings me back to the hill. I don't think learning from another path requires us to abandon our own. In fact, maybe it would help us appreciate our own a little bit more. I can love Jesus deeply and still learn from a Sufi teacher. I can sit beneath a tree and experience something sacred without needing to change the name I use for God. I can hear wisdom from a pagan tradition without needing to become pagan. I can encounter something beautiful in another person's understanding of the divine without feeling that my own relationship with the divine has somehow been threatened. In fact, perhaps curiosity itself can be an expression of love. Tell me what you see from where you're standing. Not so I can tell you why you're wrong, not so I can decide whether you're allowed to come on the mountain, but because I can't see the whole mountain from where I'm standing either. I can't. That's humility. And I think our world could use a little bit more of it. We don't have to agree about everything to learn from one another. We don't have to erase differences to love one another. And we don't have to understand somebody's entire spiritual path before treating that path and that person with respect. So as we close this journey, I want to give you something simple to sit with. Think back over the last several weeks. Christian mysticism, Wicca, contemporary pagan traditions, and Gaia-centered spirituality, Sufism. And don't ask which one was right. Instead ask, what did I notice? Was there something that challenged you? Something that made you uncomfortable? Something that felt strangely familiar? Something that gave language to something you've experienced but never knew how to describe? Then ask, what did another path help me see about my own path? And finally, what is one way I can allow my inner light to become visible this week? Not someday, not after you've healed everything, not when you've become the person you think you're supposed to be. This week. This week. Maybe it's kindness, honesty, rest, creating something, forgiving, setting a boundary, spending time in nature, remembering God. Maybe it's listening to someone whose experience is different from yours. Maybe it's simply allowing yourself to be exactly where you are on the hill today. You don't have to climb somebody else's path. You don't have to keep running up the hill at Mach speed. You can slow down. You can enjoy the journey. You can learn from the other people going up other paths on the hill. Just keep walking your path consciously, intentionally, and in the present. At the end of this week, we'll gather again for Spirit Talks and begin a new journey. And I think that's fitting because we're never really finished. One journey gives way to another. One question opens another question. One season becomes another season. We learn, we experience, we change. And sometimes we discover that when we return to something we thought we already understood, we see it differently because we're different. So perhaps that's what I want us to carry forward from Radiating Your Inner Light. Your light isn't something you have to earn. It isn't something you have to prove. And it isn't something that becomes brighter by making someone else's dimmer. Tend to your light. Protect it when necessary. Notice what obscures it. Allow other people to teach you. Stay curious. Stay humble. Love generously. And then let your life become the expression of what you've discovered within. As always, I invite you to carry a little more passion, footwork, and energy into the week ahead. Passion reminds us to live intentionally, to pay attention to what matters and what makes us come alive. Footwork reminds us that awareness alone doesn't change our lives. We have to take the next small, meaningful, and intentional step. And energy reminds us to nurture ourselves along the way, because we cannot sustainably pour into the world from an empty cup. So as we finish this journey, honor your path. Stay curious about the paths beside you, and remember, the world doesn't need you to shine like anybody else. It needs you to uncover, tend, and authentically radiate the light that is uniquely yours. Thank you for spending this month reflecting with me. Until next time, more passion, more footwork, more energy, and as always, peace, love, and pixie dust. I love you.